as anticipated, Lot. In our study of these characters, all the men and women of the Bible, and there is somewhat to say about Lot. Some things I guess we can't really say, but there is quite a bit we can say. I guess we probably could have included Lot's wife in here. She's going to be included either way, but really we're looking at him. And we're going to look at Lot from with Peter's statement in mind. Lot appears from Genesis 11 to Genesis 19, and that's it. Until Peter brings him up in 2 Peter chapter 2. Lot's wife is brought up, so I guess in that sense he's brought up in another place that I don't have written down here. But Lot is brought up in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. And it's not the fact that Peter brings Lot up, it's what he says about Lot that leads us to, I don't want to say scratch our heads, but at least think about some things about Lot. And what that statement is, by the way, I should probably go ahead and say this for those of us who need a refresher. Lot was Abraham's nephew who accompanied Abraham from Mesopotamia, even though he was told to leave his family, and everything behind. He brought Lot with him. And Lot's legacy, I guess I probably could have taken it a little farther than... Oh, I did take it farther up there. I didn't on the handout. He eventually chose to settle in Sodom and ultimately lost everything. Almost everything. Pretty close to everything, including his wife. And you could really take it back to that choice to live in Sodom where he went wrong. And it led to that. But some of the things that we might think about Lot, when we look back at 2 Peter and hear Peter say this in verses 7 and 8. In fact, that's the middle of a sentence, but here's how Peter's argument starts. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into Tartarus, is what the Greek actually says, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment. And then if he didn't spare the ancient world, if he didn't spare Sodom and Gomorrah, but then he says, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. That is very valuable information about Lot, because I feel like he gets a bad rap in a way in the Old Testament narrative because it's not really about Lot, okay? So some of the parts that Lot appears and he plays a part may not cast the most favorable light on him, especially that he chose to live in Sodom in the first place. And then some of the choices, and it may be a language thing in some instances, but whenever the angels showed up at Sodom, okay, let's just break this down first. Abraham brings Lot with him. They become even richer than they were before. They're growing. Lot's herdsmen and Abraham's herdsmen start to get into some conflicts because of close proximity, I guess. The land, they don't own any of the land at that point. They haven't, I should say. But they're there, and it's like now it's kind of like they're outgrowing where they are. And the herdsmen start getting into little fights with each other, quarreling. So Abraham says, which is a great example, one of the greatest examples of humility, I don't want there to be any strife between us because we're brethren. We're kinsmen. I'm going to give you first dibs. Whatever part of the land you want, you go. It's yours. I'll go the other way. And we read that Lot, he put some thought into it, I guess you could say. He considered, he looked across, and he saw this portion of the land that was very appealing to him. It was Sodom and the area around Sodom. But the problem was, Sodom was a notorious place of sinfulness, worldliness, immorality. It was a mecca of wickedness. And Lot still chose to go there and live there. And then God tells Abraham that he's going to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, a neighboring city, and destroy them. Well, that is horrible news to Abraham because his nephew's there. Lot's there. Lot lives in Sodom. So he intercedes on behalf of Lot, and ultimately God says, okay, the city is still going to be destroyed, but Lot and his family, similar to Rahab, like we talked about earlier in Jericho, same thing. Lot and his family, I will save them and get them out. That is basically how it plays out. Now, this is those three men show up at Abraham's house. One of them turns out to be God himself in the form of a man. The other two turn out to be angels. So 3 men visited Abraham, but actually 0 men visited Abraham because not a single one of them was a man, actually. The 2 angels go to Lot's house. And this is where things get weird, okay? And we don't understand exactly what Lot's thought process is. These 2 angels are there, and men of Sodom come there and want Lot to give them up to them. We already don't really, it's not exactly clear in the text what these men even wanted with these 2 men. There's been speculation. It's not pretty. Probably just leave it at that. They wanted them for their own purposes of immorality, it seems. We know it was something severe because of Lot's suggestion. Lot says, this is Genesis 19, verse 7. I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. How about this instead? I have 2 daughters, virgin daughters. Why don't you take them instead? You see, I can't help but think there's something lost in translation here. Yeah, he knows what they want to do, it seems. But he'd rather offer his own daughters. Now, the only thing I think that we can take for certain here is that this shows how seriously Lot took hospitality rules and ethics, etiquette, you might say. And, he doesn't want, these are his guests, and he doesn't want to give them up. Kind of like how far we see some men go to keep their own word sometimes, like Jephthah, for instance, and how seriously they took that. Here, let me just double check this. Dean, did you have something? You had your hand up for a little while. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Double check. There doesn't seem to be any indication at all up to this point that Lot knew that these men were angels, because if you notice, that's what he probably would have said. He would have said, "Do nothing to these men, for they're angels from heaven." That's what I would have said, But what he said was, "For they have come under the shelter of my roof." So you're putting me in danger, of divine, justice or whatever. If I allow this misfortune and harm to come upon these men that have come under the shelter of my roof, that's his line of reasoning. But this is why I say it's a little complicated, the issue of Lot, because Peter has nothing but glowing praise for Lot. Peter presents him in a way, and we have to remember, Peter wrote by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Whatever he said about Lot is accurate about Lot. So what we must do is see what it is that Peter must have been referring to when he calls Lot righteous twice. He calls him righteous Lot, and he says about how that righteous man, how did he word it? That righteous man lived among them day after day, and so on. Somebody might argue, well, verse 8 probably shouldn't be there because it's in parentheses, and that's somebody added that. Okay, well, sure, for the sake of argument, he still called him righteous Lot in verse 7. So why would Peter call him righteous Lot? This sounds a man who offered his own daughters? Well, I've already explained the hospitality thing, and that's what he emphasizes. But it's what Peter explains about Lot's time in Sodom. He tells us something. Go ahead, Joe, before we get into that.
Well, first, in verse 5, the last part, it tells us what those men intended to do. I mean, it's very clear.
Which part?
The last part of 5.
Oh, okay.
And so
That we may know them.
we know what they were intending to do. But even in that culture, I mean, like with David's daughter Tamar, I think she said to Ammon, just ask my father and he will give me to you. So daughters were given in marriage by the men of their household. So it's not like that. Obviously, these men intended to do an abomination to God. And Lot's like, no, don't do that.
Yeah. And he obviously was very serious about it because of how drastic his suggestion was, which, that's not to say that, I don't know if it's fair for us to say either way that Lot's suggestion, his bargain, was altogether wicked in itself, or that his suggestion was actually, I could see and have, people could argue either way. Like what he did was actually a good thing. Well, I don't know if I go that far, but also it's not to say that there's actually no excuse whatsoever for him suggesting whatever he is suggesting. It's just, it is what it is, as they say. One of my least favorite expressions that ever existed. But what Peter's commentary is about Lot is the key, I think. We learn something that if I'm not mistaken, we don't learn in the Genesis account. At some point during Lot's time in Sodom, he started to realize his own mistake. He started to realize, Peter tells us, he was vexed. Some of the older versions would say, the ESV says tormenting. He was I said 2 times, 3 times he calls him righteous. He was tormenting his righteous soul over the lawless deeds, the stuff he saw at Sodom. So it started bothering him. He saw, it's not like he was living in Sodom and he was having a great old time. I love being here with just living it to the fullest until he left, loving what he saw and sort of getting dragged into it and stuff. We learn, thanks to Peter, it bothered him. What he saw, the stuff that he saw people doing in Sodom bothered him. Yeah, Dean?
Well, that would be true of us today. It should bother us.
It should, yeah.
And when he's in the condition of living it every day after day after day, it should bother us, and that's what it was bothering him.
Yeah.
Eventually, he had to make up his mind what to do, and he did.
Yeah, he was a human being, so he was not perfect, and we could still criticize and say, well, he should have already been out of there. I mean, if it really bothered him that much, he should have left. It's not always as easy as it might seem, especially to an outsider like us. But at any rate, Peter lets us know it was really bothering him. Yeah, go on.
I don't know the Hebrew on it, but I looked up the idea of so wickedly, and it's only used twice in the vocabulary in the Old Testament. This reference and then the one in Judges 19, where it's a very similar situation. The man is there, they want this new person, and the guys don't act so wickedly.
Yeah.
And so I think in terms of what they would know they're doing, this is an abomination. This is something in God's terms is a very wicked thing.
Yeah.
I don't know that a lot would have thought it, but it's like, well, I doubt if they, like the alternative anything, that these people are beyond a certain, and I have to think that he might have known there was something different about these men, because he doesn't give any hesitation to when they tell him what to do.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it could be the miraculous that they see,
yeah.
but or he sees, but at least he's willing to sort of pick up lots of stuff.
Yeah, he's trying to protect them, which would imply to me that he thinks they need his protection. But all of a sudden, it says they reached and got him, pulled him into his own house, and shut the door. And then they struck the men outside with blindness. Well, obviously, assuming that Lot was aware that just happened, now he knows. These are not just ordinary men. But about what they wanted to do, it all rests on the last phrase of verse 5, bring them out to us that we may know them. Okay? Now that is usually a euphemism for the same thing every time it's used. Mary became pregnant before she had known any man. Joseph did not know her until after Jesus was born. And we read of any other time that phrase is used. It's a euphemism for coming together in a certain way, physically. If that is what this means, then it's very clear what they were what they wanted. Again, just think about how wicked this city must have been for this to have even happened. 2 new men come in, and there's a mob at the door. It's out of control. I mean, it's unheard of. But again, Lot, even before this, for some period of time, it was weighing heavy on his heart, which says to me, he realized, I should have never come here. Debbie, yeah.
Yeah, the New King James Version says we may know him carnally.
Okay, well, that sort of gives an idea. Yeah, they weren't just trying to welcome him to the city, which could easily be if you don't understand the language there, that could sound like what it means. We just want to welcome them. They're here. We don't hog them to yourselves. Let us give them a warm welcome too. Yeah, a little something else. Something else is in view there. Yeah, Joe.
To me, this is an example from my own personal understanding. Humans can only see behaviors. God is the only one that can see the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so God knew what Lot was thinking. I mean, I think Abraham was exceedingly patient with Lot. But, and God calls him righteous.
Yeah. It's not even just that he calls him righteous. I mean, it's just, like I said, it's overwhelming. Righteous Lot, he tormented his righteous soul. That righteous man, So I think the main conclusion is Peter knew things about Lot that we don't know. And one of those things is that tidbit that, like I said, very valuable information, because it changes what might be our misconception about Lot. Just that little piece of information. Yeah, Dean?
Well, the thing is, when Lot first, when Abraham first lived there, Lot had the choice, when he saw that it was very fruitful. He had plenty of cattle, he also, there was enough there that he could see, and I'm sure that with looking at that, his herd probably increased too, because of the fact that the land around it was there for years like what he had. So, and I'm sure that he did increase in his herd, stuff like that. But the other thing, when he got in there later and found out, he might not know at first of what Sodom was, but he soon did find it out.
Yeah. And regardless of how much he knew, he would find out. And it seems that he may have had ways of knowing beforehand, considering the kind of place that it was. But anyway, that was the mistake of his life, really, one of the mistakes of his life. And, the men said, the angels, I should say, they're always called the men, except for in verse 1, or almost always called men, because that's what they looked like. Do you have anybody else here? I mean, anybody else in the city? Because you need to bring them out, because we're about to destroy this place. Kind of shows that, or reminds us, angels aren't omniscient like God is. So they were there to do the job. They were there to save Lot, but at the same time, it seems they didn't know everything. So do you have anybody else? We need to bring them to. We're about to destroy this place because God has said so. And so Lot goes to his future sons-in-law. They're called his sons-in-law, but it very quickly says, who were to marry his daughters. So get out, because Jehovah's about to destroy this city. But they thought he was kidding. They didn't take him seriously. So the next day, sun comes up. The angels, there again, the angels said, you've got to go now. Take your wife Take your 2 daughters, or you're going to fall. You're going to fall with the city. But he didn't go right away. To the point that the men, the angels, had to take him and basically drag him out. But notice what Moses says. The men grabbing him and dragging him out, the angels grabbing them and taking them out, was God being merciful to him. Talk about patience. God's being patient with Lot. Whatever patience Abraham may have had for Lot, God even more so. Brought him out. One said, escape for your life. Don't look back or stop anywhere. Escape to the hills lest you be swept away. So they leave. But something bad happens. It says they leave the city. Lot, they come to a place called Zoar. Here's an important verse to show, one verse that shows God is more than one person, even in the Old Testament. Jehovah rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Jehovah out of heaven. We already know that one of those 3 men was also playing a part in this, who turned out to be God himself. And now Jehovah is raining down fire and sulfur from Jehovah in heaven. So you got Jehovah and 2 Jehovahs in verse 24. And we know that one of them's on the earth in the form of a man, or was at least. But Lot's wife, I think this is one of the most misunderstood situations in the Bible. Because another euphemism is used. She looked back. I am not convinced that what Lot's wife did was turned around and looked to see the city burning down. The language here does not indicate just an innocent turning of the head to see the marvel of divine justice, but that she maybe hung back, she went back, she turned back in more than just a habitual turning around. That would be hard not to do, I think, especially if you hear whatever sounds may. I mean, you see a flash of lightning in the sky, you instinctively, you kind of look, you look that way. Or, if you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you hear the sound of 2 cars banging together, you're going to look. I mean, I don't know if all she did was just turn around and looked. But some have suggested that there's more involved there. Yep.
They said something about a longing for the house and the earthly possessions, like she was left with reluctance, like she inside was. Well, her other daughters were killed, her daughters and son-in-law. I'm sure that her heart was breaking for her daughters that stayed behind.
She was obviously torn, and it may indicate she actually did go back. Actually went back. Again, I understand the language is not, yes, on the surface, he said look back. I think she just looked back, but that's not always the way language works. Yeah, Jay?
One of the footnotes references Matthew 24.
Okay.
There where he's saying,
Don't turn back, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the last person is the one who's out in the field, not to turn back to get his coat.
Yeah. Just go. Yeah.
Saying, you're going to go back to the house to get your coat.
Seems like that may be what she did. She may have done that. And therefore, she became a pillar of salt. And again, here we go. Yes, she died in the same way everybody else died. When I was a kid and I heard about this, what I pictured was that God transformed her into a salt shaker. That's what yeah. she turned around and God, poof, there she's a salt shaker. Straight out of the kitchen, just an empty salt shaker. Because, a pillar, the English word pillar, is one thing. And then a pillar of salt, that made sense to me, a pillar of salt. Well, I don't, a grain of salt, sure, I understand that. But, a pillar of salt can't mean anything to me except a salt shaker. Even a pile of salt isn't really exact. I mean, let me put it this way. The whole city basically became a pillar of salt. The reason she did is because she was there. So it does stand to reason that that's what we're reading happened, is that she went back and perished with everybody else, which makes it, I guess not any more tragic, but just a different kind of tragic, I guess, that here they brought her out and she chose to go back anyway. Yeah, Dean?
Well, the thing is, I was so dumb looking at it now. Abraham, of course, he was far away, but he was able to see the burning of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. So he saw it, and he didn't have any effect on him. But like you said, I think she did more than just look. She went back. But otherwise, like I say, Abraham, he was able to eat all was happening there. God did restore him.
Yeah.
So it's a different situation.
Yeah, so that's basically the story of Lot. It gets even weirder. We're not going to get into what happens next. It's not so much a commentary on Lot necessarily as it is the daughters that did survive. It's a little there's a little confusion about how many daughters did he have. Were the two daughters that he offered the men of the city the same two daughters that were engaged, as we would call it? If that's the case, then they did make it out. But if he had four daughters, and the two, that would mean that the two that were engaged died in the city, and only the two that he had offered them made it out with him. Either way, it doesn't make much difference. At the end, he's now a widower. It's just with his two daughters, and that's pretty much the end of Lot's story, legacy, except for the fact that Peter brings him back up and overwhelmingly calls him a righteous man with a righteous soul who was vexed over the evil that he saw in Sodom. So, Joe?
Well, to me, it's a repetitive thing in the scripture that humans follow their hearts. I mean, David was a man after God's own heart, that David was looking to follow whatever God said. When the Israelites started looking back for Egypt, I'd rather be in slavery, I'd rather do this. And doesn't he also say, anybody who puts his hand to the plow and looks back? In other words, if you long to go back to that sin, you're going to go there. You go where you long to go.
Verse 14 said he would be sent out, spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters. So they were married.
Okay.
It wasn't the ones that were in the house that were virgins.
Yeah, the ESV says they were going to marry they were to marry his daughters, which implies that they weren't married yet. So I guess it just depends on there's obviously some difference in interpretation of how that phrase in Hebrew should be translated. So some say imply they were married, and some imply that they weren't yet married. So it could go either way, obviously.
They also got daughters that lived, got out.
Yeah, we know for a fact that 2 of his daughters survived. But what we don't know is if it's the 2 daughters that he brought up to give them, or if there were 2 other daughters. And the only reason that makes a difference is because if they weren't the same, then that means that he lost 2. He didn't just lose his wife; he also lost his 2 daughters and the sons-in-law. But the other version of the story would be that he only lost the 2 sons-in-law, and that's the one I think. He lost the wife and the 2 sons-in-law because of the way the rest of it plays out. How the daughters said, tricked their father into giving them children. And that would make perfect sense. Well, our future husbands are gone. What are we supposed to do? Which, by the way, is not condoned or commended at all. What they did is totally wrong in multiple ways, I would say. But we don't have to get through that. Shortest verse in the Bible in English is obviously Jesus wept. Second shortest verse in the Bible, English Bible, I believe. I think it might be so close we'd have to count the letters. In fact, I'm already going to take it back because even my brain can count that high. Second verse, shortest verse, depending on translation, Luke 17:32. Anybody know what Luke 17:32 says? It's 3 words. Anybody want to guess? 3 words. Take your shot. Remember Lot's wife. There it is. That's the whole verse right there. It's in Luke 17, like I said. The days are coming when you'll desire to see one of the days of the sons of man. You won't see it. You'll say, look there, look here. This is Jesus saying, don't go out and follow them when people are saying that. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, but on the day that when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur came down and destroyed them all. So it will be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, and this is Luke's account of what J.E. already referenced, let the one who's on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away, and likewise let the one out in the field don't turn back. Remember Lot's wife. It's a powerful verse, just alone. When you know the story, remember Lot's wife. That's a sermon right there in itself. The third shortest one is pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, which, by the way, is the shortest verse in the Greek New Testament, not Jesus wept. Yep.
Like you said, Lot's daughter did him wrong, but those 2 boys that grew up, those Mennonites and the Moabites came in, one of them said those worst enemies.
Yeah.
So that's even worse, the problem that we had, that Lot, Moab, and the Ammonites constantly through their wandering and what have you.
Yeah. Never underestimate the unintended side effects and consequences of actions. Always something to consider. All right. A few lessons from Lot. It's a tragic mistake to let earthly, worldly criteria outweigh spiritual criteria. Depending on how much Lot knew about Sodom, he definitely would have done that. He would have let the earthly side, beautiful, cool metropolis, metropolitan, nice, kind of big city, not unlike some of our big cities, There isn't a certain kind of appeal, or there can be, to those places, obviously. It's a totally different kind of environment than you might be used to in a smaller place. But then again, you don't want to ignore all the other side of that. Wickedness, groupthink, and immorality. And Lot could tell you all about that, the dangers of making that choice. Number 2, many a life's mess is of one's own making. Sometimes we bring it on ourselves. Lot did. You know, if he hadn't chosen to go and live in Sodom, he would have never had to try to get out of Sodom. Just common sense. Yeah.
His daughters would never been engaged to these men from there.
Yeah.
Like the people you surround yourself with, or the place that you choose to be impacts, family.
Yep, impacts everybody. You most of all, and those around you. So it may have been for the best that his daughters didn't get married to these men, if that's the way that the correct translation. Better late than never, number 3. And I say that about Lot coming around. Because, even though he was vexed in his soul, he didn't leave Sodom. So he still had that. He seems to have had a place there, a position. He was somebody there to an extent. He had a position at the, he was in it. He was part of it. And it wasn't until God basically kicked him out of the city, or like we said, dragged him out of the city, that he actually left. Well, better late than never. Yeah, better late than never. We may fight against coming to a realization for a long, long time. But better late than never. Better soon than late, but still better late than never. So that's why the last word on Lot gets to be a commendation, a compliment in Peter's second letter there. But then again, at the same time, just because he was bothered by the sin around him, he still would have perished if he hadn't left. And God told him that. They told him that. You've got to get out. This is God showing you mercy. He's not going to miraculously put a bubble around you while he burns the city down. This is God's mercy. Us being right here telling you, get out. And, that makes a powerful lesson for us today. God has offered His mercy and grace to everybody, but He's not just going to magically, miraculously save us on Judgment Day against our own will and wishes. God's mercy and grace is extended in His invitation. He's doing the same thing. He has sent us. He hasn't sent us 2 angels to come and tell us. He sent His own Son to tell us and to say, basically, get out. Get out of the world. Come with me. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right? Come with me if you want to live. I think that's Terminator 2. I want to say Terminator 2, okay? Nobody knows. You never heard that before? Have you heard Hasta La Vista, baby? Oh, you've heard that one, but you never heard Come with me if you want to live. Have you heard Get to the Chopper? I'll be back. Yeah, you've heard I'll be back? I guess that could be a sermon too. Terminator. Jesus said that. I'll be back. But He also said, come with me if you want to live. Okay? Sort of. Can't believe you didn't. It's just such a disappointment. Anyway, you ruined it. Now I lost it. Anyway, that's the invitation. Just like with Lot, you've got to get out. You've got to come out. You've got to leave. And that's what Lot, thankfully, did. Sadly, his wife. Negative examples are often more powerful than the positive ones. Jesus didn't say, remember Lot, did He? He said, remember Lot's wife. You know why? Because that resonates maybe even more. Look at what happens when you don't. Remember what happens. And the point of that is for us to not make that same mistake. So come with Him to receive God's mercy. God's mercy is, hey, here's your chance. Here's your lifeline, so to speak. All right, Joe.
I'm just thinking that a comfort zone is probably the And just sitting where you are might be comfortable, wouldn't it be, Joel?
Yeah. I'm moved, but I'm not moved at the same time.